you have multicultural, liberal, tolerant Canada, but you don't in Quebec. That's the whole point. The Francophones are not very tolerant. Quebec is actually an intolerant place for Anglophones, for Jews. There is a reason why all the Jews fled from Montreal to Toronto, you know. When the separatists took power in Quebec for the first time in 74, that's when Montreal went down and Toronto went up. You mean, you know, Toronto was nicknamed Hogtown in the 60s. And Toronto's rise as the preeminent city of Canada is a product of the separatists taking power in Quebec. Somebody even joked that they should put a monument up in Toronto to that Quebec separatist leader, because Toronto would never have become the major city of Canada if it hadn't been for the separatists. Prior to 74, the major city in Canada was Montreal, not Toronto. Because Jews in every country, this is not a criticism, it's a way of defending yourself. Jews in every place where they live align with the strongest power to protect themselves. And in Montreal, they aligned with the Anglophones. This is one of the ironies of Canada. The separatists who took power, and particularly the terrorists in the late 60s, were very left-wing. I mean, Quebec is the most left-wing province of Canada. And yet they were anti-Semitic because the Jews were aligned with the Anglophones. They had power, money, banking, finance, this, that. I tell you why, one of the reasons I began researching it, because the house we bought in Cabbagetown was owned by the daughter of one of your most famous writers, Mordecai Richler. And we'd never heard of him, right? But guess what? He's a Montreal Jew. He hates the Francophone separatists, and they boycotted his funeral, which happened when we lived in Canada. They boycotted his funeral because he basically called them, I think there's a famous quote, he called them the descendants of the whores that were sent from France to Quebec. It was that on that level. He was a massive Anglophone. I think he lived most of his life in London, actually. But we'd never heard of him. And then, you know, lo and behold, his daughter was the one whose house we were buying in Cabbagetown. And then his son, her brother, came round afterwards and asked if he could take something that had been left behind. So, yeah, I mean, that whole... Harel comes from Quebec, and his obsession, which is seen in this book, which I'll talk about, his obsession with language in Ukraine is a product of his Quebec background. He hasn't outgrown that.